Okay, calm down.
With our eyes, Rise writes, they are allies. The move gives Russia 55,000 allies, troops in Belarus in the north to strike Kiev while Ukraine focuses on the south.
No, I don't even. I mean, I've seen a few people hope that. I mean, first of all, we don't know how many troops Wagner has. There are still a lot of Wagner troops that have already been that are still in Ukraine, and as far as I understand, a lot of them have already been sort of attached to other, or more or less attached to other, like, army units. 55,000, I just hugely doubt that. First of all, it's not 55,000 anymore, but I really hugely doubt that the number of Wagnerites that are going to go to Minsk is going to be that much. There's this very complicated story. I'd love to tell it because it's such a crazy story, but it's actually almost too complicated. So I'll try and make it as simple as possible. It's called Wagnergate. And this was 3 years ago when Lukashenko, just before his big election, you remember all the big protests and the regime change, right? So before that, funnily enough, in the days, weeks, months, and years before that election in August of 2020 in Belarus, Lukashenko and Putin had a terrible relationship. The Kremlin had tried overthrowing him. The Kremlin actually tried engineering a color revolution in 2010, their own, using Russian media to get him overthrown. And in 2020, they had their own favored candidate for the presidential election to try to unseat him.
Yats, right?
No.
No, I'm kidding. I'm doing the Victoria Nuland thing. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. And, or to pressure him. But there was a pretty serious candidate, so Lukashenko locked him up. And Lukashenko, as the election was coming near, was very paranoid about Russia, very paranoid about what Russia might do, because he had been making big overtures to the US and NATO. He had been talking about doing joint exercises with NATO. He was trying to pull away because Russia had basically said, shit or get off the pot with us. And the year before, 2019, Lukashenko said, basically gave his final word on an air base that the Russians had wanted to build in Belarus, and he said no. Now they can stage an invasion from Belarus. Back then, they couldn't even build an air base there. There are pictures you see of John Bolton visiting with Lukashenko, of Pompeo. We were going to put in a very pretty powerful State Department figure as our new ambassador there. But at the same time, we were also ramping up our regime change, machinery as well. And it's not a singular, well-oiled machine, but essentially what happened was a couple weeks before the election, out of the blue, Lukashenko got word that from his KGB, it's called the KGB, their internal security service, that there were 50 or 100, maybe 100, I can't remember how many, Wagnerites who were already notorious, staying in a hostel. They didn't know why, what they were doing there. There's, maybe we're going to be taking a flight. They'd come in either on a bus from Russia, I can't remember, or train. I can't remember how they gathered there. And he thought this meant Putin was going to do a coup now, and that was it. And he might have even been getting fed some of that information from Ukraine. Because, and this is the part where it gets weird, but I'll just try to spell it out. Basically, this is part of a plot by Ukrainian intelligence to lure Wagnerites, who they believe had fought in the Donbass from 2014 to 2020, and they believe committed war crimes. It was a way to try to entrap them. They put in ads saying, you can make all this money doing this mercenary gig in, maybe it was Venezuela or something like that. And, gather here in Russia, then you go to Minsk, and then from Minsk, we're going to get a charter jet that goes to Turkey, and then switch charter jets and go to the destination. And Ukraine's military was going to intercept the charter jet over Ukraine airspace, like what Lukashenko later did to Protasevich. You remember that guy? And it's possible, according to some reports, that the CIA was either directly involved in this conspiracy or at least knew about it. And it's also thought highly that part of this conspiracy involved opponents of Zelensky, where they were going to try and use the whole chaos of this to maybe overthrow him and put Poroshenko back in power. So it's all very convoluted. But the bottom line is this: Lukashenko thought Wagnerites were there to overthrow him. He had them surrounded by paramilitaries, arrested, beat the shit out of them, tortured them. And as he was torturing them and stuff, and then came the election. And immediately with the election, you saw massive regime change protests broke out. And Russia at first didn't even understand what the Wagnerites were doing there. And they were saying, this wasn't a regime, we're not doing a regime change. We don't even know what they're doing there. And then they started getting to the bottom of it and understood that actually it was Ukrainian intelligence or foreign intelligence agencies that were behind this. And Lukashenko looked out the window and saw, massive demonstrations against him, that the West was totally, backing the demonstrations. Russia wasn't. And then he realized he made a mistake about the Wagnerites. That's some important context to how Lukashenko got involved in this. Eventually, he let them go. He apologized. And what Putin did was he realized he had leverage like he'd never had before over Lukashenko, and he could finally maybe bring him to heel after a 20-year very unhappy relationship with Lukashenko. And they did. Putin waited until the protests were so massive and Lukashenko could have fallen. And basically Lukashenko gave him whatever he wanted. And that was and then the Russians came in and helped prop up his regime. And that's the reason why Russia was able to invade when it did its large-scale invasion in February of 2022 last year. A huge part of the thrust came out of Belarus towards Kyiv to surround Kyiv to try to do a regime change. That could have never happened but for the Western-backed regime change protest movement that failed and pushed Lukashenko into Putin's arms, because he wasn't a Putin puppet until September 2020. It's an interesting side story. And so, so the Wagner now setting up there and being friendly and so on, it has a history to it as well. There's the idea that Lukashenko, though, wants 55,000 unruly Wagnerites on his territory when he saw that they went against Putin. And how does he know they're not going to go against him?
Right.
It's Lukashenko's main concern is keeping power and keeping stability. And having 55,000 Wagnerites on his territory is not going to, I don't know, I guess, I'm sorry, maybe people don't want to hear this. I'm telling you what I know,
Right.
from being a watcher of this. It's like the last thing he wants. And I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Prigozhin may be put out to pasture there with a few of his top commanders for a long time. Maybe they'll be whacked one way or another, die in helicopter crashes. Maybe they won't be. Maybe Prigozhin will be able to get, asylum in Israel, like a lot of oligarchs who can claim Jewish ancestry and avoid extradition. We have no idea what deals were made. All we know is that, order was restored, and Putin is very busy making sure people feel less insecure, feel better about his rule. I don't think people are about to I don't think anyone, it's just not a Russian thing, really, the idea that there are people who want to overthrow Putin and take control themselves. But that said, as Yasha was saying, this war has really empowered, as wars do. Wars are incredibly unpredictable by their nature, and this war has been as unpredictable as any war. It's definitely empowered, hard right nationalists, as wars tend to do, especially when wars go bad and grievances build. Think of Vietnam leading to Reagan. And Chechnya helping lead to Putin, the Yeltsin's loss in Chechnya. But, even Yeltsin wasn't overthrown, and he lost that war, actually lost it and destroyed the whole country, and he still wasn't overthrown. But I would just hugely doubt that they're going to become a giant force that Putin would allow that. First of all, he doesn't want that. He wants Wagner soldiers to join the regular army and serve under the regular military, and probably lower down officers as well. I don't know about the higher ups. It would be, I don't know, it'd be difficult to command these people, but definitely does not want that force reconstituting itself on Russia's border.